Okay, we are recording. I am Brandon Polite, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, and I'm joined by Anthony Cross, who is Senior Lecturer in Philosophy at Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas. So Tony, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, it's my pleasure to be here.
Okay, you and I are talking about memes. And so I guess I'll just start with the question of what are memes?
Well, I think we might want to clarify. We're going to be talking about internet memes. Most discussions of memes in a philosophy context, you might find people talking about the term from Richard Dawkins, which is like the smallest replicating unit of culture, the cultural analog of a gene. And there's like a really rich discussion as to whether internet memes are memes in the Dawkins sense, but I think we can just kind of table that. So we're going to be talking about internet memes, which I would hazard a guess that most people watching this video are somewhat familiar with the phenomena. These are, various bits of internet culture, whether they're sort of images often overlaid with text or hashtags, or sometimes even we might think of viral videos as memes that get spread through various online platforms, social media, Twitter, various internet forums, things like 4chan. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a question, what exactly is a meme? There's been a lot of work done on this, specifically in media theory. There have been quite a few different definitions, but I have one that I developed that I really like. And it draws on some recent work in the philosophy of art, and specifically the ontology of art. So if we think about, say, a meme like the distracted boyfriend meme, which, if you're not familiar with it, pause the video now and just go and Google it, and you can find it. So think about the fact that you've probably encountered various instances of this meme, various, instances of the stock image of the boyfriend with the text looking, from, whoever the sort of girlfriend that he's with towards the woman that he's distracted by. And there are lots of different instances of this. You can sort of customize it however you want. And so I want to start by introducing a distinction here between each one of these instances that you may have encountered and the meme itself, where I think it's pretty intuitive that there is a kind of distinction to be drawn here between, say, one particular distracted boyfriend image that you encounter and this broader phenomenon, the distracted boyfriend meme. So what exactly is the meme if it's not just an individual instance? I think that there's a nice analogy here between a meme and its instances and, say, something like a musical work and individual performances of the work. So if you think about it, when you, say, go to a performance of Beethoven's Ninth, what you're encountering is a performance of the work, but that is not identical, at least on some views, to the work itself. The work itself, we might say, is something more like, whatever is individuated by the score that Beethoven composed. So, I draw on the account of the Ontology of Musical Works developed by Joe Levinson, according to which musical works are kind of indicated sound structures that give us rules or instructions for generating performances. I think we could probably say something similar about memes. What is a meme? Well, it's a kind of template, a set of instructions that allows us to generate individual instances of the meme. It's a set of rules that, if you know them, you're going to be able to both understand instances of specific memes that you encounter. You're also going to be able to generate new ones. So, the rules for the distracted boyfriend meme are pretty simple. You start with that stock image of the guy and the two women, and then over the guy, you put some text that has to do with, whatever the main focus of the instance is going to be about. On the woman in blue, you put whatever that is normally associated with, and the woman in red, you put the thing that is distracting the constituency, and that's it. I mean, that's the set of rules that you have to follow, and if you know that, you can then generate an instance of the meme. There are, of course, a lot of disanalogies that I think are kind of significant here between the case of the musical work and the case of internet memes. So one sort of really important difference is that if we think about Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, there is an author, Beethoven, who composed the work, and Beethoven's creative act is what fixes the structure, the score, which is going to set rules for generating performances. That doesn't really happen, or at least it doesn't happen in the same way in the case of internet memes. It's not like there's some internet authority out there somewhere who is writing down the rules of memes. I think meme culture, like many other forms of vernacular culture, is authorless. There just aren't authoring conventions that fix the structure of the meme. So the meme structure is something that is emergent, I think, in community practice. Usually what happens is that one person will seed the meme by introducing several, say, images or instances into an online community, and then other users will sort of get what they're trying to do and then start to iterate the meme itself. And over time, that will form a community of users who are all kind of more or less aware of the structure of the meme, who are able to kind of discern its rules and in fact even police them to some extent. But it's not like there's any one individual who is responsible for fixing the meme's structure. And I think in the same way, for this very reason, a meme structure can actually shift or change over time as the community's practice shifts. This is something I talk a little bit about in the case of Pepe the Frog, which is another really influential meme. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit later, but what might start out as a very basic and straightforward, say like an image you post in a reaction to something like Pepe did, over time might become a very different meme entirely. The rules can shift and change as the community practice shifts and change. And that, I think, is part of why memes are a participatory art form. They are an art form that you are capable of joining in. You're sort of encouraged to share and disseminate memes. And by doing so, you can actually take an active role in forming a part of the community of users of the meme, which allows you, through your contributions, to actually, either reinforce or shift and change the meme over time. The only other thing, which I think it's worth kind of noting about memes, is that, when we think about musical scores, the only other disanalogy that's relevant here, musical scores, for the most part, are pretty exacting with respect to what they call for performers to do when they're performing the work. Some are not. Some allow a lot of latitude for performers. Memes can be like this. Sometimes the structures can be pretty fixed. They can sort of tell you to do exactly this. I think distracted boyfriend is a pretty clear set of instructions, but sometimes they're much more open-ended. Sometimes a meme can just be a particular figure or character that you say Photoshop into whatever kind of circumstances that you want. And so the rules there would be very loose. There would be a kind of thinness to the set of instructions. So for example, there was a very popular meme in January of 2021 of Bernie Sanders wearing mittens at the presidential inauguration. It was like everywhere. It's actually gone now. I have not seen an instance of this meme at all on the internet recently. But the rules for that meme were just take this image, this exploitable of Bernie Sanders, and Photoshop it into whatever context you think will be humorous or entertaining. So that's going to be a much thinner set of rules, let's say, than like the distracted boyfriend meme, where there's a much more rigid set of instructions for users.
Awesome. Yeah. So the connection to music, I think, is really rich, but you're absolutely right to point out the disanalogies between your account of memes, or what memes are more generally, and Western classical music, right? And I think, a better analogy in the musical realm, if it isn't, standards in the jazz tradition, right, which are very thin relative to works of classical music, then it's folk music, right?
Yeah,
where that can shift and evolve, and it's very participatory. And a lot of traditional folk songs, we don't know who the author was, right? And sort of who the author was doesn't matter in the way that it does in classical music.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's awesome. So do you have any thoughts on sort of the parallel between
Yeah,
memes and folk music?
I think it's and it's not just folk music, right? I think that
Yeah.
memes have parallels with lots of other forms of vernacular culture more generally. I think the folk music comparison is a good one. I think another great point of comparison would be jokes and joke telling, oral traditions like storytelling. And I think, you know, you put your finger on one key aspect of the comparison, which is that in large part, these sorts of vernacular cultural practices are authorless, right? So authoring conventions are a product of, you know, a particular time and place and a particular set of art world institutions where, you know, we wanted to attach an individual to a work so that, you know, that individual could either receive praise or blame or credit or have certain protections for their work. But there are lots of aesthetic practices where yeah, we just don't have any similar sense that work should be authored in that way. So I think, you know, for the most part, the emphasis in these sorts of vernacular cultures is much more on a kind of participatory engagement with community and tradition, in which you're sort of encouraged to, as it were, make your contribution by kind of putting something into this broader set of circulating discourses and works that is not attached to any one individual, right? So there just isn't a kind of authoring convention. Works can be largely anonymous. As a result, I think the traditions are highly participatory. What I think is maybe one way in which meme culture and internet culture more generally differs, actually maybe two ways that meme and internet culture differs from more traditional forms of vernacular culture. One is that our contributions to internet culture, when we share a meme or when we, you know, repost something or retweet something like that, it doesn't have to be, but it can be anonymous or pseudonymous. So in other words, you don't necessarily have to, in the case of like sharing a folk song or telling a joke, you're going to be there as your embodied self, telling the joke to a set of people in a room who can sort of see you as a whole person. And you're going to have to kind of integrate that practice with other parts of your embodied self and life. That doesn't have to be the case online, right? We have much more freedom in the kinds of communities that we join, the practices that we take on. They don't have to be as tightly integrated with our embodied selves. And so I think that encourages a kind of play. I think that it leads us to be much more free in our meme creation and sharing on practices, or at least it can be. If you look at a place like, you know, say 4chan, which, you know, for viewers who are unaware of what 4chan is, it is a image posting web forum that is wholly or anonymous. And one particular part of 4chan, one of the boards on 4chan, B is what it's called, is like the primordial muck out of which a great deal of like wonderful internet culture has arisen. It's also a place where a lot of like horrible stuff gets posted. And so, you know, there's I think, you know, what maybe accounts for the fact that there's so much playfulness and creativity is this this ability that we have to step in to these communities to sort of play at immersing ourselves in practices and traditions without necessarily having to invest our fully embodied selves. At the same time, I think this is the other respect in which meme culture and internet culture more generally differ from more traditional modes of vernacular culture. There's a possibility for really rapid spread of memes that you might not have in more traditional vernacular culture, where you really do have to kind of tell the story, tell the joke to people who are there with you in an embodied context. You know, if you create a meme and you post it on Twitter or you post it on some social media platform, it can take over the internet in a matter of days. It is often the case that this happens. Memes can move at sort of breathtaking speed. And so this is also kind of interesting because It means that the kinds of communities that are involved in sharing and creating memes can change very rapidly, which is something which I think also leads to really interesting questions.
Yeah, right. And I guess the parallel there to music would be the development of recording technology and the development of radio, right? Where these, forms of music and particular folk songs and traditions that were hyper localized, right? And it took a long time to spread from one place to another. Now with mass media, right, can be spread very quickly. I mean, relative to the time period, right?
Yeah.
Very quickly to lots of places that originally wouldn't have been aware or couldn't have been aware, just due to a lack of physical proximity to these forms of music or these particular songs, and then those traditions get taken up and morphed in all sorts of ways.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, and I think it's also interesting. You mentioned things like radio. Yeah, you get folks who were, say, practitioners who are then, say, recording pieces for transmission over radio. And this is one instance where you get these institutions that take a vernacular cultural practice and make it something that can fit the author model, where you have a work that gets performed, that gets recorded and performed again and again in the same way, that's fixed by way of the recording. And you begin to have artists in the genre who are sort of folk artists, as it were. And that's something that maybe comes out of this practice, but is not necessarily the same thing. You see the same thing in joke telling with stand-up comedy. You have stand-up comics who are engaged in a sense in the practice of joke telling, but are not necessarily doing it in the same way. They're doing it, as it were, as a kind of as an art in which they are an artist. And I think you actually see some of the same thing happening to memes. There are on platforms like, say, Instagram, you begin to see meme accounts, meme creators who are specifically individuals dedicated to creating memes, although sometimes they just sort of repost and spread them. So it's a little bit, sometimes it's kind of a curation as opposed to a generation. And so I think that you can see these practices taken up and put into this kind of authoring model. But I think what I'm kind of interested in is not so much that. I'm more interested in just like the everyday experience of folks on the internet who are making and sharing and creating memes, who don't take themselves to be professional meme creators or something like that.
Yeah, let's talk about those people and their experiences. So you mentioned a few things. One is the playfulness that anonymity or pseudonymity allows on the internet. But there's also as you also mentioned, the downside of those aspects of internet culture, right? Is that, yeah, it allows radical freedom in that you get to post whatever you want without real world consequences, or at least, the thought is you don't have real world consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows for all sorts of toxic stuff. And so do you want to talk about that duality a bit? I think it's worth exploring. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, so there's a great book, which I in fact have right here that I'm going to plug, by Whitney Phillips and Ryan Milner, titled The Ambivalent Internet. And they explore this duality, right? They basically say that because there is a sort of lack of constraints, of embodied constraints, it makes it the case that many of our interactions online are fundamentally ambivalent. We just don't really have enough context to kind of know. They could go either way. And there is often an instance of, say, what you might think is like a serious post is in fact just trolling, or vice versa. And yeah, I mean, it is sometimes very difficult to know when you're encountering someone online and interacting with them, the extent to which you're dealing with a person who is sincerely expressing themselves, who is trying to connect with you, who is trying to show that they have a kind of sincere interest in you. And this is a problem online. I think we have a sort of difficult time actually forming communities of individuals who sort of have a kind of regard for each other. And I think this is actually a problem that I think memes are helpful in solving. One of the things which I think memes can do is function as a kind of community glue online, which allows us to sort of knit together online communities. And we can come back to that in a minute. But I think that this is something that is sort of morally neutral. I think oftentimes, communities can form around memes which are really horrible and awful just as much as they can around memes which are cats saying humorous things. One of the examples I mentioned earlier was the case of Pepe the Frog, which is a meme that is again, if you haven't seen it, I encourage you just to go ahead and Google it. It is an image, a cartoon frog. The image is drawn from a comic strip by the artist Matt Fury. Initially, Pepe was it was a picture of the frog saying "feels good, man," which was posted on 4chan as a kind of response to questions about like, why are you doing this thing? And these people would just post the image of Pepe. Over time, the community got a little bit looser with the meme itself, and you began to see different iterations of Pepe. There's sort of sad Pepe, angry Pepe, and then over time the meme expanded further, and Pepe kind of became it was more, the meme was just about drawing new instances of Pepe in various circumstances. You had rare Pepes, which are just completely surreal and bizarre, and this became very popular online very quickly. So popular, in fact, that various celebrities, like say Katy Perry, were posting Pepes on Twitter. The folks on 4chan were really upset about this. They didn't like the fact that one of their memes, which they had created, had gone mainstream, if you will. And so they set out to basically kill the Pepe meme, or at least to alter it, to try to make it something that no one respectable online would touch. And they did this by trying to make Pepe into a hate symbol, by basically making Pepe associated with the far right, with fascists, with Nazis. And they were pretty successful in this. They were actually able to sort of shift the norms of Pepe. Pepe became a kind of symbol, if you will, of the alt-right. Pepe showed up in various sort of Trump campaign stuff in the 2016 election, in a run-up to the election. And I mean, to this day, like the Anti-Defamation League says that Pepe is a hate symbol. And again, I mean, this is just a case where it's a little bit hard to know the extent to which this meme is functioning as a kind of big in-joke among all of the members of 4chan, and actually, all the folks who kind of share Pepe's, or whether it's sincere. There's a kind of real ambivalence here, whether Pepe is meant to actually function as a hate symbol or not.
I mean, at a certain point, I don't know if that matters, right? I mean, it may have started off as trolling, right? That in a sense it went mainstream. We don't want it to go mainstream, and so let's rein it back in by making it not respectable, by associating with these things. But I'm guessing over time, people were posting it sincerely to express their allegiance to white supremacy and the alt-right values.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So even if I mean, this is an interesting case, right? So the guy who created the original image in the comic strip, he had nothing to do with it becoming a meme on the internet and it going viral in the way that it did, right? And so we have the original author, his authorship being denied in a sense, right, or at least taken away from him. It's authored as it becomes a meme. There are authors who are anonymous. We don't know who they are. And then it goes against their will, right? That we didn't intend it for this purpose, just like the original artist didn't intend it to go viral in the way that it did and to be used on 4chan in the way that it was, right? I don't know where I'm going. I think I know where I'm going. Help me out.
I think, yeah. So what you're gesturing towards is there's like a question here about who has the kind of control or authority over the meme. You're right. Matt Fury, the artist who is responsible for the image of Pepe, he never consented to the image being used in the meme. Initially, when it sort of started out, he was kind of bemused and was kind of like, well, I guess this is the internet, weird things happen. But over time, as Pepe started becoming a hate symbol, he understandably started to get pretty upset. And he did various things. He published a comic strip in which Pepe, he killed off Pepe, sort of metaphor. He granted he didn't kill the meme, but he killed the character. that wasn't the end of it, though. He was sort of increasingly frustrated, and he actually began to he sued various right-wing personalities and organizations who had made use of the Pepe meme using copyright law to try to get them to sort of cease their usage of Pepe. He actually sued Alex Jones of InfoWars and was successful. He actually won I believe, a $10,000 settlement from Alex Jones. And I think what is kind of interesting here, on the one hand, there's a sense in which, yeah, Fury clearly does not have any sort of ownership or control of the meme itself, right? Which is this template and structure for generating instances and sharing them online. But perhaps he does have some sort of control, at least legally speaking, over the image that was appropriated to make the meme. And this is a kind of sticky area. A lot of memes are, they involve appropriation, right? They involve appropriation either of kind of pop cultural things. They involve appropriation, like, say, the stock image that is at the center of the distracted boyfriend meme. Or, there's often appropriation of likenesses of ordinary individuals. So, there are several cases of this. Scumbag Steve, which is kind of an ancient meme at this point, was a guy named Blake Boston who had posted a picture on his MySpace that got taken and turned into a meme. And so, yeah, for the most part, these appropriations happen completely without the consent of the original creators. And there are questions here about what kind of control these folks ought to have over the meme. I think in principle, at least, because in practice, it's very difficult. There's not really going to be any mechanism that you can use to control the circulation of a meme online. But at least in principle, I mean, there's a question about whether the origins of the meme should have any control over the meme itself. And it's also worth noting that many of these folks who have had their likenesses appropriated in the case of memes, it's not just that they have tried to, say, restrict the circulation of the meme. Many have tried to benefit from them by, for example, selling NFTs of the original images that were appropriated for the meme. They've tried to, Matt Fury has actually tried to do this with Pepe. He sold numerous Pepe NFTs. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that they're really kind of tricky issues here where we have to maybe try to disentangle, on the one hand, the kinds of controls that these originators should have, from, on the other hand, questions about the ownership of the meme itself.
I like it goes from one problematic art form, namely internet memes, to monetizing it in the form of NFTs, which is another problematic internet art form.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we could talk about NFTs. I think what is most interesting about NFTs, specifically in relation to the case of internet memes, right? So there's sort of the problems I think with respect to ownership and control here are compounded, because on the one hand, what you're getting when you buy, say, an NFT from a meme creator just is not the meme itself, right? You're at most getting an instance, but more likely just like the parts out of which instances of the meme are made. But then there's another problem, which is that I think, with respect to NFTs more generally, non-fungible tokens, to viewers who are not interested or who are not aware on this, it's not worth getting into. It's unclear that you're actually getting any sort of real control over anything when you buy the NFT at all, right? Because you're just being given a sort of receipt for ownership to a thing that basically everyone can already access simply by Googling it and looking online. You're not actually getting any sort of ability to restrict its circulation, any ability to control it in any meaningful way. That, these are the sorts of things that we tend to think come with ownership. And so I think, there are real worries about NFT sales of memes that I think, people have not really appreciated, but it's okay. I think, most people buying NFTs are just kind of crypto bros who are trying to make a quick buck off of, this bubble. So maybe it doesn't matter.
Yeah, right. I mean, the parallel to music, I think, makes it sillier, right? That, you get House of the Rising Sun right? Like,
Yeah.
what is that? What are you getting, right? It's this abstract template that anyone can use. You can't stop people from using it. You know, it's not like when CBS was suing people because they claimed to own the birthday song, right?
Yeah.
Falsely, right? I mean, there it's, you know, there's a melody, there's words, it's straightforward, right? But getting a folk tune, right,
I
or
mean, maybe,
getting
yeah,
access, you know, you own a joke like the Aristocrats, right, or
yeah.
the moth joke or something, right? Like it seems conceptually incoherent.
I mean, you can own a performance of those things, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, it would totally make sense if, you know, you were uh, to say, I think, you know, the late Norm Macdonald has a fantastic performance of the Aristocrats joke, right?
Mm-hmm. Or
And
the moth joke, especially.
the, well, yeah, the moth joke too, like all of those
Yeah.
performances of that joke um, would clearly be the sort of thing that like the estate of Norm Macdonald could say, hey, this is Norm's, and we're gonna sell this, and maybe we'll sell the license to somebody else who can then take control. Like that all makes sense. But I think that, you know, yeah, it doesn't make sense that like you're not going to be able to buy the House of the Rising Sun or like John Henry or like all these other folk tunes, right? They're just like not the kind of thing that you have control over. I mean, there's a question here about who actually does own these sorts of things. Um, and I think this leads us into really interesting territory with respect to questions about, say, cultural property and cultural ownership. I think, you know, one of the things which a lot of folks who are interested in, say, cultural appropriation would say is that, you know, certain traditional community practices, if anyone owns them, the folks who have a best claim to owning them would be insiders in the community responsible for the practice, or the community as a whole. And so maybe that makes sense, let's say, for you know, particular cultural practices that are kind of rooted in a place and a real world and existing community. But I think that it gets a little bit messier if you think about, you know, the community responsible for meme generation. It's going to be potentially a community that consists of like every user of the internet. And so maybe there's a sense in which we all kind of collectively own memes insofar as we're all participating in them. But it's also the case that the bar to entry into that community is absurdly low. And so, yeah, like basically anyone who wants to could very easily join the community of users of the meme and thereby have maybe a claim to using it, to at least some ownership of it. A kind of interesting case here is the case of corporate usage of meme culture. So, you know, you go to any, for whatever reason, it seems like fast food chains, Twitter accounts and social media presences have increasingly just become meme posting accounts. And you know, you go to these accounts and you see just like their instances of memes. And this might strike some as, I think, really problematic. It's like a corporate cash grab, an attempt to you know, appropriate internet culture for their own purposes. But I think it's really hard to find a way to argue that this is a problematic form of cultural appropriation, if only because I think it's not clear who the community being wronged here would be. And at the same time, I feel like it's also difficult, if not impossible, to get a sort of authoritative statement by that community that they do not want their work appropriated, especially if the corporations themselves can make a claim to being a part of the community that is making and using the memes. So yeah, it's I think, you know, I think that like this hasn't stopped, you know, various folks from getting really upset about this. Like way back in I think 2010, a bunch of folks on 4chan got extremely pissed off because Hot Topic was selling a t-shirt with like a meme, a rage face on it. And they started this like online harassment campaign of Hot Topic. It didn't really do much, but yeah, I mean, I think in that case, I mean, similar to the Pepe case, I think that this community that originated the meme might have been really upset that the meme had sort of gotten bigger than the community itself. And yet, you know, I'm not sure that there's kind of room for, given how easy it is for people to join this online community to become a part of spreading and propagating the meme, I'm not sure that there's ground for them to stand on to say like this is restricted and cannot be used by people outside of this online community.
Yeah, especially because the images themselves have been appropriated from other sources, right? That they're complaining that someone else is doing something to them, which they did to someone else.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
It just sort of reeks of hypocrisy.
I think it's, I think it's just maybe, I don't know if it's hypocrisy as much as it is just maybe a misunderstanding of the kind of practice that they're engaged in, right? Like it is, I think there's a sense in which, perhaps they might think, yeah, like as a community, we're responsible for this, we own it. But I think what they're not getting is the fact that, memes have this ability to expand and contract and to move outside of any existing community and to be deployed globally or even, customized and redeployed for, more specific niche communities. I think we've all seen cases where, say, some global meme template gets customized in a way that makes it applicable to our local interests, whether it's, something regionally appropriate or something associated with specific like hobby or niche interests that we're into. So yeah, I mean, I think what is really interesting about memes is the way that they can very easily spread and be redeployed into, a variety of different communities, and the way that the kind of community of meme users and iterators is also capable of this radical, sometimes even overnight expansion.
Do you think the best way to think of memes then is that they're ownerless, right? They're sort of authorless in a certain sense, and that could mean that they're ownerless, right? I mean, given all the problems you've outlined with, who's the community, it seems the community could be every user of the internet, in which case there isn't exactly a community that we can appeal to, that members of the community can't say, we own this, because other members are like, no, we don't, like, we don't care what Wendy's or Arby's does with this. I mean, do you think that it could be the case that they are both authorless and ownerless?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I don't know, I sometimes I go back and forth on this. I'm not totally sure if they're completely ownerless, because I could imagine that at least in certain contexts, a particular group or community could say like, this is our inside joke meme, and it's only going to be the kind of thing that we share with each other. It's not designed to be shared outside of this group. And in those cases, you might have a meme that is authorless, or at least that is collectively authored, which is something that maybe that community has the ability to lay claim to. But I think that the majority of memes that we are familiar with that are just sort of circulating online, are the kinds of things which I think we would say that not only are they authorless, they're also in practice ownerless, because of all of these difficulties associated with determining who owns them, who has a right to control them. I think the upshot is that for all intents and purposes, they are largely ownerless.
Awesome. Well, Tony, this was a really fun discussion. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, I've had a great time. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Take care.
Bye.